Well, hello and happy 4th of July weekend. Pastor Karl here from my kitchen table for Gladewater Church of the Nazarene, and I hope you have had a fabulous week. This is what the television and movie people refer to as product placement. This is genuine, made with sugar, Dr. Pepper, a Texas favorite. You'll notice this can's not opened. I don't drink sodas. This thing's got 40 grams of carbs, 39 of which are sugar. Not the healthiest thing in our house, but anyway. Just to make a point, product placement. It's been around for forever. Probably the most famous is several decades ago, when Steven Spielberg made E.T., he approached the makers of M&Ms for a place in that movie, and for whatever reason, they said no. So he went to the makers of Reese's Pieces, and the rest is, as they say, history. But that wasn't the first product placement in a movie. As a matter of fact, I just did some reading on this I'm a nerd, I guess. But I found out that the very first movie to ever win the Academy Award for Best Motion Picture was a airplane movie, my thing, called Wings. And in the movie Wings, some of the actors are definitely seen enjoying a Hershey bar. So it goes way back. Even farther than that, perhaps. Would you believe product placement in the Bible? Well, we have fun with this, okay? Bear with me. In Psalms 47, it says that we are to shout unto God with the voice of triumph. So, that's a motorcycle, right? And then in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, the disciples were all with one accord. That's a car. State tourism. Noah looked out of the ark and saw. Well, yeah. And then one from my junior high days, from Genesis chapter 24, and this is actually in our text today. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. Anyway, that gets us into where we are today. If you remember last week, we were looking at the story of Abraham and Isaac. How he took young Isaac to the mountain and prepared for a sacrifice. Isaac said, "But Father, where is the sacrifice?" And Abraham said, "The Lord will provide." And he did. Well, we get now to chapter 24 of Genesis, and now Abraham is quite elderly. Isaac is all grown up, about 40 years of age, according to what we see here. And it was time for him to find a wife. I'm glad I didn't wait until I was 40, but it's different times, different culture. And the situation here, obviously, Abraham was not in his native country. He wanted a wife for Isaac that was from his own people. They were surrounded by foreigners. Well, actually, I guess in a way they were the foreigners, but they were surrounded by Canaanites. And Abraham did not want Isaac to marry outside of his faith, outside of his culture. So he asked his servant, and in chapter 24 of Genesis, the servant is not named. I'll get back to that. Chapter 24 begins like this. Abraham was now a very old man, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. One day Abraham said to the man in charge of his household, who was his oldest servant, Swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not let my son marry one of these local Canaanite women. Go instead to my homeland, to my relatives, and find a wife there for my son Isaac." And the servant asked, well, what if I can't find a young woman who will come here? Should I take Isaac there? And Abraham said, "No way. If you can't find a young woman who will come here, then you are released from your obligation." So the story begins. If getting back to this whole product placement thing, if we were to do a movie about chapter 24 of Genesis, I mean, we have several characters. Obviously, Abraham is the patriarch of the whole family. We have Isaac. And later we have Rebekah and Rebekah's whole family. But the star of this chapter really is the servant. And that's what I want us to really focus on. Excuse me. What I really want us to focus on is the servant. And as we look at the servant, I want you to think about this. What kind of servant am I? Ask yourself that question. What kind of servant am I? Well, let's skip ahead to verse 24. And by the time we get to verse 24, it's Genesis chapter 24, verse 24. By the time we get there, the servant has already found Rebekah, and he has asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" And verse 24, she says, "My father is Bethuel," she replied. "My grandparents are Nahor and Milcah, and we have plenty of straw and food for the camels, and we have a room for guests." The servant fell down to the ground and worshipped the Lord. "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham," he said. "The Lord has been so kind and faithful to Abraham, for he has led me straight to my master's relatives." Her grandparents, her grandfather, was the brother of Abraham. So the young woman ran home to tell her family all that had happened. And Rebekah had a brother named Laban, and when he saw the jewelry that the servant had given her, and he heard her story, he went out to the spring where the servant had found Rebekah. And I'll cut to the chase here. Laban said, why are you still out here by the spring at the edge of town when I have a room for you and food for your camels? Come on, let's go home." And so the servant, and he had an entourage, of course. It was more than just him. They had other servants, and they were bringing gifts, pretty extravagant gifts, actually. And Laban unloaded the camels and gave them provision, gave them straw and food and water, and then they started to sit down for the meal. The servant said, "I don't want to eat until I have told you why I have come." "All right," Laban said, "tell us your mission." And then Abraham's servant proceeded to tell the story. Verse 34 says, "I am Abraham's servant, and the Lord has blessed my master richly. He has become a great man. The Lord has given him flocks of sheep and herds of cattle, a fortune in silver and gold, and many servants and camels and donkeys. When Sarah, my master's wife, was very old, she gave birth to my master's son, and my master has given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear that I would not let Isaac marry one of the local Canaanite women. Instead, I was to come to his relatives here in this far-off land, to his father's home. I was told to bring back a young woman from here to marry his son. The servant was focused on serving his master and on doing what his master had asked him to do. Now, I realize completely the word master is not politically correct in our culture today. But that's the verbiage, that's the words of the narrative. If you're more comfortable calling it employee and employer, that's perfectly fine. This person who is on this mission very likely was not a slave. He was in the employ, but he had such devotion to Abraham that he was focused on doing what Abraham wanted him to do. In this culture, in these days, the idea of an arranged marriage was not uncommon. And also realize that in this time period and in this culture, women really were not consulted. Once her father and her brother agreed to allow this marriage to happen, it would have been understood, it would have been expected that they would just tell Rebekah, you're going with this gentleman and you will marry our kinsman's son and have a good life. I think it's very significant when we get to verse 57, and it came time to decide when they were going to go back. Her father and her brother said, well, we'll call Rebekah and ask her what she thinks. So they called her. Are you willing to go with this man? They asked her. And she replied, yes, I will go. And so they packed the camels and got everything ready. And there's an indication here that Rebekah was quite young. Not a little girl, but definitely a young woman. Mid to late teens, perhaps. The indicator here is in verse 59, where it says, the woman who had been Rebekah's childhood nurse went along with her, and her family blessed her as they parted. Well, the rest of the story is almost a storybook kind of romance. It truly was love at first sight. When Rebekah saw Isaac, she did dismount quickly, and she asked the servant, who was that? And we kind of read between the lines, who is that very good-looking fellow coming to meet us? And the servant said, oh, that is Isaac. And so she covered her face, which would have been the custom. And chapter 24 says, Isaac took her to be his wife, and he loved her very much. And then that story continues on. Isaac and Rebekah, of course, Rebekah has the twin boys, Jacob and Esau, but that's another story. In chapter 24, the servant is not named. However, one of the commentaries that I consulted suggested that if we look back to Genesis chapter 15, Abraham is talking to the Lord, and he says, O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since I don't have a son, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all I have. He will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no children, so one of my servants will have to be my heir. The commentary I consulted suggested that the servant who went on this very important mission for Abraham, his trusted servant Eliezer of Damascus. So what does that tell us about this servant? It tells us that life did not go as he had originally thought, because you know that this fellow realized that he was the heir apparent for Abraham until the kids came along. But still, even though life did not go as he had expected, we still see a tremendous isn't even a good word. It's an extreme level of dedication, of loyalty, willingness to serve. So put yourself in that position as you serve God. Are you that kind of servant? Now, life might not have gone exactly as you had hoped. You might have had things all planned out decades ago, and something happened. Something changed. The winds of fortune shifted, as a poet might have said. But still, even though life didn't go the way you had expected, are you still focused on serving our Master? Are you still focused on serving God and doing His will? Several things that the servant did in this story. First, he was, as I've already said, he was absolutely focused on serving Abraham. The second thing is he was very quick to ask God for guidance. Now, in the text, I want you to read that for yourself. I don't want to take time right now to read it, but chapter 24 of Genesis, the servant lays out a bit of a fleece, as we say. And that's another story. But he prays for specific guidance, and his prayer was, Lord, I'm here at this spring. I need your guidance. So how would it be, Lord, if I ask one of these young women who's coming out here at the end of the day to gather water, how would it be if I ask one for a drink, and the one who says, absolutely, and here, I'll water your camels too. Lord, let that be the one. Well, that's what Rebecca did. She was very hospitable and very conscientious, and the servant noticed, she's very pretty. Isaac will like her. But he was very quick to ask for guidance. As a matter of fact, the word says that he hadn't even finished the prayer, and he saw Rebecca and asked her for something to drink. And as soon as he saw this stamp of God's approval, he was very quick to give God praise. He stopped right where he was and prayed a prayer of thanksgiving to God for leading him in that way. And in his dealings then with Rebecca's father and her brother, he was not arrogant in his dealings with them, but he was very assertive and very confident because he was on a mission for his master. We too, when we're serving God, when we're doing God's work, we don't need to be mean-spirited. We should never be mean-spirited. And as the saying goes, we're not called to beat people over the head with our Bible. But we are called to speak the word, and with a holy confidence we can be assertive and let God put the words in our mouth as we do His work. Genesis chapter 24, the story of Rebekah being found to come and be the wife of Isaac. Part of the story of faith, part of our heritage. Before I go, I want to remind you that on Sunday, July 12th, which is next week, at the church, there will be a congregational vote on the question of whether or not to call Reverend Charlie Ashby as the pastor. Brother Ashby, his wife Sierra, their daughter Chloe, visited several weeks ago and has agreed to allow his name to be put forward to the congregation. Here's the way it works. Eligible voters are members of Gladewater Church of the Nazarene who are 15 years old or older, active members, and you must be present to vote. There are no absentee ballots, no proxy voting. So active members of the church who are 15 or older are there, will be able to vote. It'll be a simple yes or no. Yes, I want Brother Charlie Ashby to come and be the pastor. No, I don't. And that vote will happen next week, July 12th. Now, some have asked the question, Pastor Karl, what happens when you're no longer the interim pastor? What about these recorded messages? I've had several folks request that I continue. If you're in that number, let me know. And I will continue to share in this way and just enjoy the process. Anyway, we'll let God lead us on that, and let's follow His direction on all that we do. Again, I hope you've had a great 4th of July, and just a parting thought on that. July 4th is Independence Day. Independence is a neat idea. It's not terribly a biblical idea. The biblical approach is one of interdependence. You see, you and I really do need each other. But the overarching reality of the 4th of July is freedom. And if the Son has set you free, you are free indeed. And on that, I say, Pastor Karl for Gladewater Church of the Nazarene, until next week, God bless you.